Well, the devil started crafting this from the early days and sort of grew it up after Jesus rose from the dead, and things started changing. You've heard about what they call a total lunar eclipse or the blood moons.
Oh yes, yes.
There is some indication that I have found that vampiric people are affected by what they call a total lunar eclipse or a blood moon, especially when there's 4 of them. A tetrad of blood moons.
Yes, yes.
In the scripture, there's a specific scripture in place where Satan is attacking the people of God, and he's using these 4 carpenters to do it. And I don't recall if it's Ezekiel or one of the others, but the prophet sees the four carpenters, and then, "What are these, my Lord?" And the angel replies, "Well, these are the 4 carpenters that are fraying the children of Israel." In other words, the devil is going to come at you with 4 things. Did you ever wonder why a car has 4 wheels? A table has 4 legs? 4 is stable in the physical. And so he uses 4 to solidify things. Now, church and other organizations like that, at best we come at him with maybe 1, maybe 2 things together, hardly ever 4. And if you imagine the horns of the altar, there are 4 horns of the altar. But back to the blood moons, there are indications that I have found that indicate that these blood moons affect vampiric people. And I'm thinking, you asked earlier how they came to be. In the New Testament, Jesus came across a demoniac man in the Gadarenes. He was cutting himself with stones and no chain could bind him. In my thinking, this person was vampiric or on its way to being one. He was cutting himself with stones, I think, because he needed blood, and his was the handiest. He's also strong enough to be in a vampiric, range, how strong he was. From AD 100 to about 1100, there's a scripture that says that if you sow a seed, whatever that seed may be, you get back more of whatever that seed was. It's just like if I go out to my back porch and I start throwing corn seed all over my backyard, what am I going to get? Corn, right?
Corn or a lot of birds.
At least corn.
Oh, yeah.
But the point is that whatever you're sowing shall come up. And there's a scripture that talks about the aspect of God we know as Yahweh or Jehovah. It says, "I create light, but I also create darkness." Now, we're not talking about personal God here. We're talking about the part of God that runs the system of seed time and harvest in the earth. So just like when I stick the corn seed in the ground, it knows nothing better to do but to grow. And so when you sow a seed of darkness, because of the rules of harvest, you get back more darkness than what you started with. And so from about AD 100 to about 1100, the devil caused people to sow these seeds of darkness. And that's what anchored the physical changes in their body like what we have today. And then from about 1100 to about 15 or 1600, their lifespan began doubling. So my hypothesis as to why they exist the way they do today is that people sowed seeds of darkness, and the aspect of God called Jehovah created them from these seeds of darkness, and the devil orchestrated all of that.
Yeah, That does sound like a very good possibility. You know that I don't know. So you mentioned you've gone to different churches, talked to different ministers. They didn't want to discuss your book. They didn't want to discuss vampires or anything about it. And they never gave you a reason why?
Other than showing me the door, they tend to ignore. Like I ask for an audience with the pastor. When I go into a given church, I'm not going to do anything unless the leadership of that church agrees with it. I'm not going to camp out in their front door and try to sell books, for instance, because when I go into the church, I'm going to respect the boundary of that pastor. You know, it's his congregation and his right whether to talk to me or not. And so generally I try to, I signed a little card, put it in the offering plate, said, "Will you please meet with me?" And so far I haven't had a bite, so I guess they're not interested.
Well, how many different churches have you tried this with?
3.
Okay.
In my area.
In your area.
And I have left books with the pastor. I said, "Would you please read this and give me a scriptural review of it?" And I haven't had a bite there. Personally, I think the book is very scripturally accurate, personally. But I was waiting on some confirmation and feedback for that. And if a church could ever possibly find their way to pray for me while I'm writing, that would be huge.
Yeah. Well, if there's any ministers listening, church or whatever, please do help him. I mean, he's asking,
Nicole has a handout on vampiric ministry since we sort of approached the subject. Vampiric people, as I write about, are largely hidden. In my little handout to her, I've described the other things that you're likely to see. And personally, I think that a church, if they choose to go in this direction, you can do a lot of damage to the devil's infrastructure by offering love, grace, compassion, and right with God to the vampiric people or vampiric community around you. And remember, there's far more human ones than true vampiric ones, but still, like a friend of mine said, everybody needs Jesus, even a vampiric person does.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, look at atheists, people that don't believe in God. I mean, when they're on their deathbed, all of a sudden they're praying for their soul, with God and Jesus. So I mean, I think
the one thing about an atheist is that they live their life and they think they're justified. And reality is what I call it, and I can be whatever I am. But to remind them that Jesus told the story of the rich young ruler who lifted up he lifted up his eyes, and he found himself in hell.
Yeah.
Hell is a real place, it's a real hot place, and you're never coming out.
Well, that's one thing I will say. The guest I had on the show did say that, if there was a hell, he said he was in it. And,
no, he's not in it till he dies.
Yeah.
But, it sounds like if he hears this broadcast, get rites of passage and read it. And then if you're led with any little inclination to go find a church somewhere, let God lead you to somebody that can tell you who Jesus is and how to be saved. Because there's nothing preventing you from accepting Jesus as Lord. And if he can help me write this story, he can help you live.
Yeah. Well, I hope he is listening because, there sounds like there's hope for him. I don't know from the standpoint, though, after this many years of drinking blood, could he eventually ever go back to being a normal person, you think, and all that stuff, or do you think he's going to have to be this way till he dies?
He's going to have to be, from what I gather, he's going to be this way till he dies, because a true vampiric person, there's no way to change them back.
Yeah, I did. Like I asked him, I said, what happens all of a sudden if you lose your circle of friends? Was say all of a sudden they decide that, hey, they don't want to do this anymore. What are you going to, where are you going to find your, I hate to say what I said, next meal? I mean,
now, he may not know this, but a vampiric person can drink animal blood for a short period of time. It's qualitatively different than human blood, but that's what Janine did. Nolan kept goats to sacrifice if she can't get blood any other way. So animal blood is a temporary fix if you can't acquire human blood that day, just so you know.
Okay. Well, that's still scary, too. That's, that reminds me back what happened, like I was telling you when I did that one radio show, where people were missing and stuff. And then, in the paper and stuff, they were talking about they were finding the remains of, sheep and lambs and stuff like that, along with human remains, too, where, they were actually, this group of people were sacrificing people. So, I mean, I don't know.
It is a dark world out there. It is.
Well, that's it.
And vampiric people are in the darkest of the dark.
Well, the thing is, they could be people that actually have gone so far as drinking blood for such a long period of time. I'm not saying that they were really a vampire from the standpoint of a vampire, but I guess you are if you're drinking blood. But it scares me because then maybe they're also at the same time, developing mental problems or issues where, where they could be a risk to the population from the standpoint where they later on maybe find themselves as a full-time vampire. Just like my guest told me that he had the cravings. He said he had the cravings. He looked at people as cattle and nothing more.
If he's craving, it sounds like he's still on the human side of this, because when Macon or Thomas has to drink blood, there's a different force pushing them. It's not like a craving. So, he still sounds human enough, but he's got a deep psychological and physiological addiction to the blood. That's clear.
Yeah, it's scary.
But like I say, any person, even a vampiric person, can come to God. There's nothing preventing you. If you feel like religion causes you to break out in hives, or if someone shows you from a cross and you shrink back from it, then you've got a demon in your head, then you need the church's help.
But, if you go up to a pastor, seriously, and you tell the pastor, hey, I've been drinking human blood, I am a vampire, it's a good chance that pastor is going to look at you and say, there's my door, get out. The same way they wouldn't review your books, okay? That's what I'm trying to get at, is that they're going
sadly, if it's... Well, like I say, there's grace even in the dark. And like I say, get my information from Nicole. I go over about 50 questions that cover some of this. And get the Vampiric Ministry handout I prepared for her. And between those two things, it should show you that, and the story itself, they have a way to come to God. And they need God more than just about anybody.
Yeah.
So you're not being the love that Jesus told us to be if you show them the door.
Yeah. Hey, Douglas, we're going to have to wrap this up here for tonight. Again, tell everybody where they can get your book, how much it costs, and, you've been a great guest, and, with people, this would, I think, it'd be a good read. I mean, I I really do. If you believe in vampires or you don't understand vampires, you can look at